Hello everyone, this is Bhupen Sharma, and in this tutorial we're going to discuss about build the entity classes for the demo application. So in my lecture 4 I showed up demo applications which has login, dashboard and register page using Bootstrap 4. So we are going to start working on that application and try to build that application as shown. So let's go through those slides again and understand what all the entities we have to create. So I can see that there is one entity which is order received. I need to create based on the month. I need to get the numbers, and there is an entity to collect all these informations about the main dashboard. There will be a company revenue, and then there is a bestseller category entity, and one will be employee information. So based on this page having 3 sections, I would say that I need to create almost 5 entity classes. So let's go ahead and start working on that. So what I did is I created a sample project called ecom dashboard, which is basically a plain Spring Boot project with the dependency of web and JPA. So by default, when you create a dependency with web and JPA and MySQL, it will come like that. The only thing that I did additional was to add with the Hibernate Core and Hibernate Entity Manager. So these are two dependencies I added to use the entity objects. The other thing that we need to make sure is we need to have a schema which will allow us to connect from my Spring Boot project to the database. So I created a schema called ecom-app into my local MySQL database so that I can connect to that. So let's go ahead and connect to this schema and see whether it works or not. So in application.property, we need to put these 5 properties to define the data source URL, the username, the password, and the driver class. Since I'm using MySQL, it's MySQL class, and then I'm using JPA Hibernate saying update. Update means any change in the entity structure in my POJO objects will, as soon as I run it, it will reflect in the DB. So now we will go ahead and start creating those entity classes. So what I did now is just to cut short this video, I created those entity classes. The product category has a category name, percentage best category. Now this is not an entity class, this is a plain Java object class, the POJO class. Same way, if we have order received, we have order collection status, which will tell me how many new orders, what is the revenue, shipped, return, and all those things. We have employee information. So based on the dashboard page, I just created these in these POJO objects. Now this company revenue, I started with converting a sample POJO object class to an entity class. So we need to use @entity annotation and add table structure defining what is the table name and where it mapped to. So it mapped to my ecom-app, and @ column will define the column name if I want to it. Otherwise it will take this name, but I want to put a different name, so I just put a different name. Nullable false means it make it mandatory in the DB, and then we have a getter and setter. So now we have the entity structure created for one table. We have a database. So how Spring Boot knows to connect? So if I try to run right now, it knows that there is an entity structure, it knows that there is a database to connect, but how Spring Boot is going to map that? Using a JPA. So we have ORM in place, we have a database in place, but still we don't have a JPA in place. So what we need to do is we need to go on the main class and then use one annotation called entity scan, which is gonna scan the entity class. So entity, let's put that entity scan. Yep, and it need a base packages. So let's put base packages equals my reference to the entity folder, entity package. So let's try to run this now and see whether it works. Maybe let's compile this. And now package. So it failed. Let's see what is the reason for failure. So it's saying no identifier specified for entity. So the reason being because there is no ID column here, which we need for relational database. So what I can do is I can create a separate class saying key entity, right? And then I can put a pk. So this is my ID column, and every time it's required ID column, the only thing is I need to map this class to my company revenue or any other class. So now I can map this ID to any of the entity classes. So if I change the structure of IDs, because ID can be a numeric numbers, ID can be GUIDs also, it will reflect everywhere. So let's go and then extend the key entity. Okay, now let's try. So this time it built successfully, and now we can go in database and check is any change happen. Yeah, so I can see now that company revenue has been created, the entity has been created. Yeah, the class has been created. So now let's follow the same approach and apply to every other entities. Try to convert those simple POJO objects to an entity object. So I copied the same structure in all the tables. The only difference is in employee, for example, I didn't put for the specific column because I thought that the column name can be same whatever I declared as a type name. So everywhere I extend the key entity, and then I just put a reference name in the schema. So let's go ahead and try to run and see. So it's built success. Let's see and check in DB. So refresh, and I can see all the table has been created. So now we are able to connect our ORM system to my DB. And as I mentioned that till now there is no JPA. So now the JPA role is going to start, because now we have a correct mapping and all those things, persistence. Now the framework is there, which connect my objects to my DB. Now we can make use of JPA. So let's create a package called repositories. And then let's create for company revenue repository. we need to create as an interface. So in this, we need to use at repository annotation to define that this is a repository, and what should be the qualifier. So I'll say qualifier as, I'll use the same name. So let's say I'll use this name. Yep, make it as a lower C to identify, and then I can extend JPA repository, defining my class objects. So it'll be the entity class called company revenue, putting my entity and log. So now this okay, this is plain JPA repository, but now this repository has been mapped with your ORM entity object, and by default it will give you a lot of features. So if you go inside this repository, you can see you'll get functions like find all by ID, save and flush, delete and batch, delete all, get one. So all these functions, and it got paging and sorting as well. So all these things, by just having extension, by just extending the JPA repository, you will get all those things. Now you want a specific query to return, then we can write an interface and then we can map it up. So let's create a repository. Now there's one more thing that we need to do, is that we created a repository, how a Spring Boot knows. So we need to run a scan. So we need to put enable JPA repository, and then we'll put base packages equals to, let's copy this one, dot repositories rep. Okay, so now my company revenue table is mapped with a JPA repository, and I can use and leverage all the feature of JPA repository. So let's try to replicate the same thing for other entity table as well. So I replicate the same information by creating the interfaces for repository. So now all tables are now linked to a repository. So that's all for this video, and in the next video we're going to move further, step-by-step approach. Thanks guys.